So let me tell you about the history of Chanukkah a little bit, because this holiday is a holiday that is very rare, because very few holidays are a celebration of a historical moment, of a historical time. We're talking Greek time. Alexander the Great invaded most of the known world, and in so doing invaded Israel. We're talking 300 before the Common Era. And as Greek methodology went, the way that they conquered people was to spread their culture, to spread their way of life. It was called Hellenization. And they believed that their way of life was an advanced way of life, that they were an enlightened society, they were very progressive, and they wanted to bring all the good they had to bring to the world wherever they found themselves. Sounds familiar? It's completely an irrelevant story, obviously. So what they did is that they brought to Israel, to Jerusalem, their sports. They were very big in sports. They had big arenas. A lot of people came to watch the games. They were very big in sports. It's really irrelevant. I mean, they brought their theater. You know, they had incredible theater. They brought also their philosophers. You can imagine for the people of the book, like we were, to be exposed to Greek philosophy, to the stories of the Greek writers, was a pretty awesome experience. We readily gravitated towards them and towards that. They brought, their political systems and the way they were advanced. They had a partial democratic system. It was male-dominated, but it was the burgeoning of democracy. It would be the ground from which the future democratic systems were going to be built. What they wanted to do was, kind of help this ancient Hebrew civilization move and usher us along to modernity, to their new ways. They wanted us to let go of our ancient ways of being and doing and adopt who they were and what they were doing, what they were about. And for a lot of us, there was a very attractive proposition. We shed our traditional garments and started to wear the togas. We started to actually learn and speak the Greek language to a point where we almost forgot Hebrew. I mean, this was the time that the Torah was translated for the first time. It had never been translated before. The first translation of the Torah, called the Septuagint, is a Greek translation of the Torah. The reason for it is that we started to lose Hebrew, and we needed a text that we could understand in English, in Greek. It's very irrelevant to our days, but we started to name our kids Alexander. I mean, think about it. I mean, a lot of Hebrew Jewish kids to this day are named Alexander. This has been a tradition that has gone on for all these thousands of years. Not everyone loved it. I've got to be honest with you. There were some groups of people that felt that they were left behind, that this new model of modernity was tramping on their values, on their way of life, on their way of being. And there was some kind of resistance, but not really until there was a change in power. And a new king arose in Israel that didn't know Joseph. There was a new king that arose in Israel that didn't know the ways of the other governors of Greece. And he wanted to really make this process of Hellenization go faster. Like the Hebrews were not picking it up fast enough after 200 years of the Greek Empire having been there almost. And so this king, Antiochus, was a little bit more barbaric in his ways. He wasn't really following the methodology of Hellenization, and he started to really impose upon us in more violent ways the Greek way of being. So he forbade circumcision. He really wanted to annihilate the Jewish way of living. He forbade circumcision. He transformed our temple in Jerusalem into a pagan worship, Greek worship temple, removed the great menorah, and installed a statue of Zeus, started to use our sacrificial altar to sacrifice pig, which is a non-kosher animal, and declared that it would be forbidden under penalty of death for us to study the Torah. He was really trying to get at, dissolving the Jewish people into the Greek Empire. But because he became so extreme and the changes were so fast, that really prompted a revolt. So those groups who were not very fond of this Hellenization process revolted. And especially one family, the Hashmonean family, took up arms. You couldn't defeat the Greek army, by battling them frontal battles. So you had to do a guerrilla warfare. And that's what the Hashmonean family started to do. And there were obviously ambushes, and that's how, little by little, they started to eat away at the Greek armies. And that way of fighting, this guerrilla fighting, that was very unique. They hit the troops of the Greek army, and then disappeared back in the bushes and the trees, and where they knew the landscape very well. And on they did that. They hit them and they disappeared, hit them and they disappeared. It was like hammering at them. And the word for hammer at the time was the word Maccabee. The hammers, they were called the Maccabees. They were called the hammerers. And Judah was the leader of that group, and Judah Maccabee led the revolt between 167 BCE to 164 BCE. It was a 3-year conflict, and eventually they prevailed. The Maccabees won. They won the war. They won the war, and they walked into Jerusalem. They took the statue of Zeus down. They rebuilt and cleaned the temple. They rededicated the temple to Jewish worship, brought the great menorah back. And this act of rededication, actually the word in Hebrew for dedication or rededication in this case is Chanukkah. So, for example, if you dedicate your house, oftentimes you put a mezuzah at the front door, you call the rabbi, I'd like you to come to do the blessing. This is called Chanukkat Bait, the dedication of our house. So the word Chanukkah means dedication or rededication. And the first thing they did, because our tradition was really much, at the time of the temple, was pilgrimage-based. There were 3 pilgrimages a year, Passover, Sukkot, and Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot. The first thing they did, as they rededicated the temple, was to celebrate in December. So it was interesting because the day that the rededication happened was the 25th of the month of Kislev, which is very much parallel to the month of December, but it's interesting that it's also the 25th. And what they did is they decided what was the last pilgrimage we missed in December. What was the last one we missed? It was Sukkot. So we did Sukkot. That was the thing we did. We rededicated the temple and we said, we know it's a couple months behind, but we're going to celebrate Sukkot. And since Sukkot is an 8-day holiday, that's why Chanukkah is 8 days. We don't know that usually. We don't know why Chanukkah is 8 days, but it was the holiday of Sukkot, and every day was another day of rededicating the temple. So that's the historical context of this. Now, it took a while, but eventually the historical become the religious. That's often how it happens in our tradition. We actually don't exactly know when the Chanukkah became a holiday. We really don't know. The problem was that the Hashmonean family that won the war and took back the temple installed themselves as the king and the priests of the Jewish people. That was never done before. There was a separation between the kingdom, between state and religion, even in those days. They were smart. But that family decided that they were going to do away with that, and they became the kings and they became the priests, which provoked a lot of ire in the Jewish people. So there were a lot of revolts. Ultimately, the Hashmonean family, who was in power, decided that they could no longer, hold the Jews back. There was too much tension, too many disagreements and revolts. They called up the Romans. They asked the Romans if they could please come in to help them keep the peace in the land. And the Romans were like, what? You're inviting us? You're inviting us in? Sure, we'll come. And the Romans came with their armies and obviously kicked the Hashmoneans family out and said, this is ours now, thank you for the invitation. And literally that was the next occupation of the land of Israel. I'm telling you all that because you can imagine that the Hashmonean family was not very popular among the scholars and the rabbis who, because of them, lived under the Roman occupation, which was devastating. We lost 3 out of 4 million people during the Roman occupation. 3/4 of our people were decimated at that time. It was a butchery. It was really violent. So you can imagine that those who survived, the rabbis specifically, who were tasked after the destruction of the temple to recreate Judaism outside now of the temple worship, did not look fond on the Hashmonean family and the Maccabees. And therefore, if you know your Bible, you know that the book of Maccabees is not part of the canon of the Jewish canon. It is not one of our books. It's a pseudo-epigraphy, and it's left outside of the Jewish canon. The rabbis hated them. They didn't want their stories to be part of what we learn and study. So for the longest time, there was no mention of that history. The only place we see a little bit of a connection to the story of Chanukkah is in the Gemara, which is the part of the Talmud that is written between 200 and 600 CE. And it's very short. There's a conversation between the rabbis of the Talmud about how long should the Shabbat candle last once you light it. I mean, the rabbis go into crazy conversations. But it was to see how you create the wax and how long should it last. And they were debating how long the Shabbat candle should last. And one of the rabbis says, guys, by the way, there were only guys there. By the way, what about Chanukkah? Like out of nowhere. There's a conversation about the Shabbat candles, and this guy comes in out of the blue and says, what about Chanukkah? And there's 2 lines about how long the Chanukkah candle should be burning for, which is a minimum of 20 minutes up to 40 minutes. So we'll see. I hope you're timing it. That's it. That is all there is to know about Chanukkah in the entire Jewish tradition. 3,000 years of it. So we don't know when the holiday began. We suspect that it began with actually the revival of the state of Israel, because the state of Israel needs some mythology to anchor their story around. And the story of the Maccabees was a really good story to tell when you wanted to send a special message to the people in your land, to who you were, the pioneers, those who fought and conquered the land, who dedicated the temple again. That was the myth they wanted to embrace. So it's possible that the Chanukkah is about 100 and some years old, that we're celebrating it again. And obviously, it has come to us as well as a counter effect to the holiday of Christmas for those of us who live in diaspora. And I'm saying that as a reality, because the holiday of Christmas, with all the lights and everything, was very attractive, especially to the young kids. And we needed something to counter that. And Chanukkah became also that holiday. It's the holiday in the darkest time of the year. It's the holiday where you bring light. It's probably inspired by pagan holidays, just like Christmas is, as the holiday of light in the midst of the darkest times of the year. It's all really connected. We borrow from each other, and we did for many, many years. On the deeper level, because there's always three layers, right? There's the historical, and then there is the religious, and then there is the little bit of the deeper mystical, perhaps, level. And as we just heard in the song we sang, this is about preserving a certain kind of way of life. And this is about us keeping our roots alive wherever we find ourselves, keeping one's identity strong and vibrant, especially in the times of darkness that our people have gone through over the generations. It's about keeping a freedom alive, to seek to stay free. It's also the holiday of oil. The holiday of oil. It's very interesting. That's why we eat a lot of greasy foods, actually. Because, the story of the miracle, which is nowhere to be found, was made up and invented so that we would have a way to celebrate this holiday. They completely made it up. And, at the time, the candles were lit from oil. It was oil with a wick inside. And that's how you lit your candle. I know, that's what they did to the Maccabees when they left the temple. They had to drag them out. Just like that. It's really hard. People fight for their freedom, I'm telling you. It's good. This is the deepest meaning of the holiday of Hanukkah. There is nothing more I have to say about this. There you go. In our days, we've made this holiday of oil as a way to bring awareness to our consumption of energy. Oil companies and the problem with big oil, as we say. So it's also a holiday to bring awareness, social consciousness for those 8 days. But most of it's really at the deeper level, a holiday that celebrates the fight between light and darkness. It's a fight that is happening within us all the time. It's a fight that's happening around us. We witness on an ongoing basis the forces of darkness and the forces of light. The yin and the yang, they're always happening. The light and the dark, the shadow and the light, always in competition. He's okay, just leave him, he's fine. To me, most of all, it's the holiday that celebrates the miracle. The miracle of the oil, the miracle of the Chanukkah, but mostly the miracle that every day is. And we're not very aware. We go through our days without realizing that every moment is a miracle. I shared with you, I think last year, that, looking at my story and all the things that have had to happen for me to be standing in front of you, and for each and every one of you with all your own life story, to be sitting exactly where you're sitting right now at 8:05 on this night is impossible. That we will all be in this room right now, sharing this moment together, is impossible. Do you see that? Do you see the miracle of this moment? It gives me goosebumps. How? What? Think about your life. And all that had to happen. I don't know where you were born. I was born a long ways from here. Long ways from here. How did I get here? How did you get here? How did we all get here in this room just half an hour ago? How did that happen? How possible? It's not possible. But every moment is like that if you really pay attention to it. That's the miracle of now. This moment will never, ever happen again. That's the miracle of now.